You're listening to the Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. This episode's narration is AI-generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. Today, a brand new jetliner runs out of fuel at 8 miles high. The reason? Someone used the wrong unit of measurement. July 23, 1983. 8 o'clock in the evening, Central Daylight Time. Air Canada. Flight 143 is at 41,000 feet over Red Lake, Ontario. Clear sky, summer sunset, visible through the cockpit windows. Captain Bob Pearson glances at the fuel displays. Blank, not operating. The fuel quantity indication system has been broken since yesterday. Ground crew measured fuel manually before takeoff. Everything checked out. And then an amber light appears on the left side of the warning panel. Left engine fuel pressure. Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quinn-Tall look at each other. That's not supposed to happen. The aircraft is a Boeing 767, Air Canada's newest plane, state-of-the-art in 1983. All electronic flight instruments, the fuel quantity indication system, the FQIS, displays how much fuel is on board. But the FQIS on this aircraft isn't working. It broke the day before. A technician in Edmonton disabled the defective channel and logged it. The plane flew 3 legs on July 22nd without incident. Pilots used a manual dripstick to verify fuel. Standard backup procedure. Captain Pearson took over the flight that afternoon in Montreal. He'd been briefed about the broken gauge. The avionics tech had accidentally left the defective channel enabled. But the ground crew knew the FQIS wasn't reliable. They measured fuel the old-fashioned way. Dripstick in the tank, read the volume, convert to weight. The only question was which conversion factor to use. The Boeing 767 was new. Air Canada had only been flying them for a few months, and Canada had recently switched to the metric system. Fuel was now measured in kilograms, not pounds. The conversion factor from liters to kilograms is 0.803. 1 liter of jet fuel weighs 0.803 kilograms. But the ground crew in Montreal used the old conversion factor, the one for pounds. 1.77, 1 liter of jet fuel weighs 1.77 pounds. The difference sounds small. It wasn't. The dripstick showed the tanks contained a certain volume. The crew converted that volume to weight using the wrong number. The flight computer said the plane needed 22,300 kilograms of fuel to reach Edmonton. The ground crew loaded 22,300 pounds. The plane took off with less than half the fuel it needed. Nobody noticed. The FQIS displays were blank. The pilots trusted the paperwork. The paperwork said, full. Flight 143 pushed back from the gate, climbed to 41,000 feet, and turned west. Everyone on board, 69 people, thought they were safe. They weren't. Commercial aviation in 1983 was the safest it had ever been. Layers of redundancy, checklists, backup systems for the backup systems. Fuel exhaustion was something that happened to small private planes, not to cutting-edge jetliners flown by experienced crews. The whole system was built on the assumption that someone had done the math right. Micro Cliffhanger 1. At 41,000 feet, the left engine fuel pressure alarm sounded. Pearson and Quinn-Tall ran through the checklist. Probably a fuel pump failure. Annoying, but manageable. They'd divert to Winnipeg, land on one engine. It happens. And then the right engine fuel pressure alarm lit up. Both engines losing fuel pressure at the same time is not a pump problem, it's a fuel problem. Pearson and Quinn-Tall stared at the gauges. The FQIS was still blank, useless, but the fuel pressure was dropping on both sides. That meant the tanks were empty. Seconds later, the left engine stopped. Quinn-Tall radioed Winnipeg. They were coming in. Emergency descent, single engine approach. And then they heard a sound neither of them had ever heard before. A sharp electronic tone, the all engines out alarm. The Boeing 767 was so new, so advanced, that complete fuel exhaustion had never been anticipated. No one had trained for it. No one knew what that alarm sounded like, because it had never happened before. The right engine stopped. The cockpit went quiet, no engine noise, just wind. Flight 143, a 132-ton aircraft carrying 69 people, was now a glider, at 41,000 feet, 100 miles from Winnipeg, with no procedure, no training, and no power. When the engines died, most of the cockpit displays went dark. The electronic flight instruments needed engine-driven generators. Battery backup kept a few basic instruments alive: altitude, heading, airspeed, but no vertical speed indicator, no autopilot, no engine thrust to adjust the descent. Pearson deployed the ram air turbine, a small emergency windmill that drops from beneath the aircraft. It provided just enough hydraulic power to move the flight controls. Barely. The controls felt like they were made of concrete. Micro cliffhanger 2. Pearson did the math in his head. They were descending. He guessed, his best guess, because there was no procedure for this, that 220 knots was the optimal glide speed for a 767. He aimed for Winnipeg. Quintal did his own math: distance, altitude, descent rate. They weren't going to make it. Quintal stared at the map. If Winnipeg was unreachable, where else? And then he remembered. Years ago, before he flew for Air Canada, he'd been a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He'd been stationed at an airbase in Manitowich Bar, a place called Gimli. The base had closed in 1971, 12 years ago, but the runways might still be there. He radioed Winnipeg, change of plan. They were diverting to Gimli. The controller checked the charts. Gimli was marked closed. No tower, no services. Quintal didn't care. He knew the layout. 2 runways. Long enough for a jetliner, if they were still usable. Pearson turned the aircraft. They had one chance. No engine power to go around if they missed. No thrust to adjust the approach. They'd get one try and then they'd be on the ground, one way or another. 17 minutes. That's how long it took. 17 minutes of silent descent. Pearson flew by feel. The controls were so heavy he could barely move them. Quintal kept recalculating. Would they make it? Could they reach Gimli? The altimeter unwound. 30,000 feet. 20,000, 10,000. And then they saw the runways. Captain Bob Pearson had flown gliders, sailplanes, recreationally, on weekends. It was a hobby. When both engines failed and the flight computer died, he didn't fly the 767 the way the manual said, because there was no manual for this. He flew it the way he would fly a glider, by instinct, by feel, judging descent rate from the way the horizon moved, adjusting speed by pitch, using techniques that weren't in any checklist, any training program, any procedural guide for a commercial jetliner. It was one of the only times in aviation history where a pilot's hobby directly saved everyone on board. But there was still a problem. As they descended toward Gimli, Pearson and Quintal saw something that wasn't on any chart. People, cars, on the runway. The airbase had been decommissioned in 1971. The main runway had been converted into a drag strip, part of Gimli Motorsports Park. And July 23, 1983, was Family Day. Dozens of people, children, racing equipment scattered across the pavement. The families looked up, a massive jetliner, descending, in complete silence, no engine noise, just wind. They scrambled off the runway. Pearson lined up for the parallel strip, the one that was clear, gear down. Quintal verified, main gear locked, front gear, the front landing gear wouldn't extend. Hydraulic failure, they were going to land nose first. At 8:20 p.m., Flight 143 touched down on the main landing gear. The nose hung in the air for a moment and then tilted forward. Metal on pavement, sparks. The friction from the nose scraping the runway slowed the aircraft faster than the brakes alone ever could. The plane stopped, just short of the crowd at the end of the runway. All 69 people evacuated, 10 minor injuries, nobody died. The thing that seemed catastrophic, the collapsed nose gear, may have been what saved them. The aircraft stopped in time. The official investigation found fault with Air Canada's procedures, training, and manuals. The metric conversion error, the broken fuel gauge, the lack of a procedure for total fuel exhaustion. every link in the chain. But the report also found something else. In the face of a situation no one had planned for, 2 pilots kept a 132-ton aircraft in the air for 17 minutes with no power, no instruments, and no procedure. They landed it on an abandoned runway, and everyone walked away. One wrong unit, 1.77 instead of 0.803. The difference was 27,000 pounds of fuel. The difference was 69 lives. And the only reason those lives didn't end that night was because Captain Bob Pearson had spent his weekends learning to fly without an engine. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.